Welcome to Autism Confidential, the podcast from the National Council on Severe Autism, where we take a hard look at many of the most pressing issues in autism today. For example, policy, research, diagnosis, education, housing, adult services, treatment, family stories, and much more. You can find us at autismconfidential.org. Now, on to our show.
Hi, welcome to Autism Confidential. My name is Amy Lutz. I'm the Vice President of NCSA, and I'm here today with Eva Feder Kittay. She is Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Philosophy at Stony Brook University. Her primary interests include feminist philosophy, ethics, social and political theory, and the application of these disciplines to disability studies. And she's written several books, including this one, Learning from My Daughter, that we'll be talking about today a little bit. And she's also edited several anthologies. And I just have to have one fangirl moment here and say that Eva has been a tremendous inspiration to me. Before I went back to graduate school, some of you may know that I'm about to get my doctorate this May in the history of medicine. And I decided to go back to school after reading Eva's books about and seeing how amazingly she combines scholarship with advocacy and her personal experience as the mom of an intellectually disabled daughter. So Eva, thanks for talking with me today.
Thank you. I'm very flattered that you were that inspired to go back to get your doctorate. That's fabulous.
Yeah. Yes, you did inspire me. So you are not the parent of an autistic child, so we should start off with that because this is, after all, an NCSA podcast. But can you tell us about your daughter?
Yes, no, my daughter is not autistic. We've just learned in 2-3 years ago that she has Pura syndrome, which is a syndrome that was just discovered at 2014. About 400 people, 405, moving up all the time, have been diagnosed with it. So it's a mutation on the Pura gene, and the Pura gene turns out to be an incredibly important one. It produces Pura alpha protein, which is very important in brain functioning. And we realized pretty early on that she wasn't developing properly. She wasn't picking up her head, she wasn't rolling, she wasn't doing the sorts of things that babies do, though it took me a while to realize that, being a young mom. But and we didn't really try to get a diagnosis. We didn't really care about a diagnosis because Sasha was just Sasha. And she is a beautiful, now 52-year-old woman. She's bright and lively, and when she's feeling well, that is to say. And she has her loves. She loves love. She loves music. Music is, I like to say music is her life. She could listen to music all the time. She particularly likes classical music, which is what she'd been hearing at our house most of her life. She can't do anything for herself. She is totally dependent. She can't feed herself. She can't toilet herself, though she has some level of continence. She doesn't walk. She used to walk. She now walks when she's well enough with a walker. She has seizures, epilepsy, And those have been particularly troublesome. And they can, they knock her for a loop. I'm not sure, she loves food. She's a real gourmet. And though now she has to only eat pureed food, but we've kept her off the tube. So that's my daughter, and I have a son as well, who is wonderful, and grandchildren who love her, and she loves them. So she is, very integrated into our family. At the age of 37, she was living at home with us the entire time. We always had help because she can't do anything for herself. So she needs 24/7 care. When the person who was helping us with her for 25 years finally retired, we found the Center for Discovery where she now lives. And I was very reticent to let her go out of our home. It became pretty clear from the beginning that she was really happy to be there. And what we find now is that she's very happy to come home on weekends with us. At the same time, after 2 days with mom and dad, she is ready to go back.
That's great.
That's about as much as I can think offhand to tell you. But
So a lot of us, the parents of autistic kids, know what it's like to have our professional lives derailed by a diagnosis and the labor that follows. You're a philosopher. What was the focus of your work before Sasha was born, and how did her life with you inform your scholarship subsequent to that?
I went into philosophy in part to distract me from the very difficult fact of her extreme disability. So I was doing pretty abstract work. I was working in the philosophy of language. I wrote a book on metaphor, which is still in print. So I had sort of bifurcated the two parts of my life. Fortunately, I have a very helpful husband who you just saw upstairs, and we were able to get help for her, very good help for her. Then at a certain point, there was a conference on philosophy and disability and mental retardation and disability. And I thought, wow. So I went to that conference, and I was rather shocked at how little people understood about intellectual disability, about significant intellectual disability. I'm not sure what they were working off, but they weren't working off the kind of lived experience I had. And so I decided at some point that I would write about it. And I finally got around to it when I got some invitations. One was a bioethics involving the question of prenatal testing. And the other was an invitation from Sarah Ruddick, who was a wonderful who's a wonderful philosopher who wrote about mothering and care. And she wrote a really wonderful book called Maternal Thinking, rather. But her paradigm, of course, was the normal child. So she wanted to write a book. I mean, she was accused of that, she's writing from her middle middle-class white background. And knowing me, she also realized she was writing from a very ableist background. So she wanted, she did a collection of essays of mothers who come from very different kinds of circumstances than her own. So she asked me to contribute to that book. And that essay was actually the breakthrough essay where I really poured onto the page so much of what I had been thinking about all these years. And the bioethics contribution was a very difficult one, because I was arguing that prenatal testing and selective abortion, these were decisions that really had to be left to the mother or to the expectant parent. It was difficult because, having a child like this, I was expected to say, no, prenatal testing is terrible. And it means that, you think my child's life isn't worthwhile. And I clearly didn't think my child's life wasn't worthwhile. I thought, worthwhile lives, I know. But it was the actual amount of time and energy, resources that it took to give her a good life that made me hesitant about thinking about having a child with another disability. Since then, I have to say, I have met parents with more than one child with a significant disability. And I've been astounded at how well they manage. And from there, I realized that I could too. But, at the time, it didn't seem like it was a possibility. So I had considered, if I had gotten pregnant again, that I would test. So that was a first time I had really interacted with people within the disability community, which was both difficult and very enlightening and very helpful in many ways, even though we never came to an agreement.
Can you say more about that interaction that you had with them?
Yeah. Well, I should say that, first of all, it was very difficult because at this point in my life, I had really settled into Sasha's disability. Sasha was wonderful just as she was. I wasn't interested in trying to change her, make her into a so-called normal child. So what being involved in this discussion did was dredge up for me, those early feelings that were so difficult. As I tried to make clear when I talked to people there that there was, my position was in no way related to what the disability community calls the expressivist objection to prenatal testing or selective abortion, which
Can you
was
just say what that is? Yeah,
yes, I just had to say that. Yes, which was that it expresses the view that a life with a disability is not worth living. Right? And that was absolutely not what I thought. So I would try to get through to folks who really couldn't see that it was really the extra, well, I'll say difficulty. I mean, it is difficult. It's difficult to have a child who cannot walk, cannot talk, cannot feed themselves, cannot tell you when they're sick, which is one of the worst things about Sasha's disability. She can't tell us when she's not feeling well, and we have to guess, We have to guess where she hurts, what she hurts. I mean, these things are, plus, of course, there's the stigma, walking out with the child and such. But aside from that, it's just a managing problem. I mean, it's just a lot of difficulty in trying to think through how to manage all these things so that she can have a worthwhile life,
Yeah.
That's
an incredible amount of labor.
Yes,
yes.
Yeah. And I remember one wonderful, amazing disability scholar. I don't know if I should name her name, a feminist disability scholar who looked at me and said, "You just want us to think you're a martyr."
Yeah.
And I said, no. She said, "It's no more difficult to raise a child with a disability than without a disability."
Wow.
This was a woman who did not have children of her own.
Yeah.
She didn't even know how difficult it was to raise a child without a disability. But she said, for her parents, it was no more difficult. Well, maybe her parents didn't want to communicate to her the extra challenges. And there are extra challenges because everything is set up for the normal kid, for the healthy kid, everything's set up for you. But not everything is set up when you have a child like mine, we have to put all the infrastructure in place. We have to put all the scaffolding in place, for her life to be a good life.
I do think the cognitive impairment adds another layer of difficulty on top of that. Someone who just has a physical impairment can communicate, like you said, can describe what they need, what they want to do. There are so fewer obstacles to them, living the life that they want, or even knowing what kind of life they want to live. But when you have a profound cognitive impairment, all of these things get so much more complicated.
Yes, and you have to do you have to pay a lot of attention. You have to pay a lot of attention to trying to understand what they're feeling at the time. Knowing what they dislike, what makes them unhappy, knowing if they're feeling ill, trying to suss out what gives them joy and what gives them pleasure and what things to continue on. And these things all have to be sussed out in a way that, they have to be in with all children to some extent, to a great deal, to a large extent, because that's what caregiving is. Caregiving involves all this real attention. And it is precisely because of living with someone who needed that kind of care, that kind of intensive care throughout her life, that I became very interested in. That I became particularly interested in what sort of developed into a feminist ethic of care. The work of Carol Gilligan is very, very significant to me. It was significant to me for several reasons. First of all, I recognized in my mother care, the person who who lived with an ethic of care. And I recognized in my father someone who lived by an ethic of justice. And I no longer try to keep those two things apart. I think they need to be brought together. But there are different ways of looking at moral life. And so that was the first thing that struck me about reading Gilligan. But the other thing that struck me about Gilligan was the whole idea that one needed to, what I wanted to work out really was what does an ethic of care really involve? And having lived with not being able to do this all by myself. And I don't think any mother or parent should think that they can take care of a child with such significant disabilities on their own. It's too much, and that comes back to bite you when you try to do it all on your own. But because I really had a commitment to myself as someone who wanted a life outside of the domestic sphere. And because of Sasha's needs, we always had someone who helped with Sasha. My husband helped a lot, but that wasn't enough. So I was also very interested in the skills of caregiving and the condition of people who give care, the situation, their situation, and the importance of, as I say, other people have said, caring for the caregiver, how that's a vital importance in terms of having the person you care for be well cared for, as well as the fact that they deserve care, like we all deserve care when we need care. And that care is just fundamental to human existence. So you asked me how I combined my personal life and my professional life. I was always interested in ethics, but the ethics that I was reading was not addressing these kinds of questions. And I thought eventually that I had a perspective on a huge part of ethical life that most people have in a fleeting way. So that, they're taking care of someone when they're sick for a while. So they understand that. But it comes and it goes, and you forget it. You raise a child that's capable on, that grows into be a capable person on their own. First few years are like intense caregiving. And then you forget about that kind of intense caregiving. So you're always a mother even when you have an adult child, but that kind of intense caregiving is no longer with you. And so what I had was a certain advantage. I had the fact and the experience of that kind of intense caregiving in front of me all the time, all through my life. And that was a particular vantage point that I thought was so important to bring to the philosophical literature. And realizing, of course, that care isn't just a small part of life. Care is central. It's central. Dependence, our human dependence that we're born with, that we return to in times of sickness, in times when we're much older. That is just part of the human condition. And of course, our interdependence as well. But I stress dependence because it is an asymmetrical relationship. Most ethical theories are based on symmetrical relationships. And it's also really important to think about those asymmetrical relationships, asymmetrical power, asymmetrical capacities, asymmetrical social positions, and so on. So the writing about disability in the context of the bioethical workshop at Hastings and writing about it in terms of mothering, that propelled me into it. But there was so much to do, still so much to do in terms of really trying to understand what caregiving means, what it means as an ethical notion, and trying to impress on us all the universality of the importance of care as an ethical concept.
So when people say care ethics today, what does that look like? What does that mean?
Well, so there's been quite a number of feminist philosophers, but not only philosophers, care theorists in other areas, in political science, anthropology, who have been writing about care. And from a philosopher's standpoint, the ethic of care gives us a different conception of who the human being is. That the human being isn't an isolated, independent self. That the self is always a self that is in relation to others. Most ethical theories just begin with the atomistic self and then move to the social connections. And in ethics of care, you start with a self that's already in connection to others. It gives us a different conception of how you think through an ethical problem, rather than using pure deductive reasoning from a principle down to particulars. You're engaged in, you engage the emotional and empathetic responses. And these are not distractions from, but they are necessary to figuring out what the right practice is in a caring situation. You are thinking about particulars. The practice of care involves a relation to a particular person with particular needs at that particular time in that particular place. This is actually a bit Aristotelian, to tell you the truth, but Aristotle has a lot to say that's valuable, but a lot to say that's not valuable. But it's the particularity of the situation that you focus on when you're in a caring situation and you're trying to make decisions about what the right thing to do is. Ethical theories in general, most ethical theories look at at being able to universalize. I think I can do something. Well, do you think everyone can do that? In care, I think I can do that because of the particularity of the situation. The other thing that I and some other people want to bring in is that care ethics is not only about a dyadic relationship between a carer and a cared for, because a carer and a cared for are always nested in a larger context, in a larger situation. So you can only care for your child, let's say it's your child that you're talking about, if you have the resources to do that properly. Now, when you're totally engaged in taking care of your child, you're really hampered in trying to acquire resources, right? You need another layer, right, who's helping you acquire the resources. But they are in a larger context, right? And so it's a set of nested, I call it nested dependencies. And that builds out into the larger community, into the larger public, into the larger social order, economic order, political order. Our political life is very much organized around the independent individual rather than on the connected individual and the individual who's connected to a dependent person. So one thing a lot of care ethicists, including myself, have wanted to do is to say care ethics is not only about that dyadic relationship. There are all sorts of interesting things to say about that dyadic relationship, but that's not enough. You always have to move on to the more social and political side of it. And I think we've seen it very writ large now in the COVID situation. I think the idea of care infrastructure is really essential. And it's kind of heartbreaking to me that it's something that's looked possible and then was knocked down, like infrastructure. Well, infrastructure is hard roads and so. Well, we don't only live with hard roads, right? And we could live without hard roads, but we can't live without care. Right?
So what would care infrastructure look like, do you think?
Well, it means that, first of all, I mean, if we're talking about disability, right, that the care of a disabled child should not be on the parents alone. Our society isn't set up that way. It's not set up so that you as a parent can easily accommodate a disabled child. Parents would, so we need care infrastructure. It also involves things like recognizing the role of parents as caregivers and the work of caregiving as work, because caregiving is work, whether we do it for the person we love or whether we do it for pay. It's work, it's real work. So those are the kinds of things that go into a care infrastructure as far as I'm concerned. I'm probably leaving out a few things because I'm just talking here, but you get the point.
Yeah, and I will say that one of the things I found, I don't know, just so important about care ethics and what really spoke to me was this concern about caregivers, because I just, like you, I've been accused of being a martyr mom, just for talking about the labor involved in caring for my son, which also is not just something that I do. We have a lot of support, which is why I was able to go back to a full-time PhD program and why I can be here talking to you. And so what can we do about this, this martyr mom discourse? How can we, draw attention to the fact that caregivers need support too, without coming across as these martyr moms that are trying to make it all about us, So I typically don't speak about my own experience for that reason, because I want to keep the spotlight on the issues involving my son. But this really speaks to me, this idea of, caring for the caregivers, and how do we do it without seeming selfish?
Oh. Well, we start with caregiving. We start with the caregiving we give to non-disabled people, to our children. What we give to our children, we give to our children out of our love and our care about them. But we also need the recognition that mothers do labor, they do work. With a disabled child, there's simply more of it. Mothers should be compensated. They should get Social Security for their labor as mothers. They should get recognition of some, and of course, that in many countries there are child stipends, which are basically a recognition, that having a child involves labor and certain financial sacrifices in terms of the marketplace. So we should certainly have child stipends, which we did for 1 year. And that's just critical. I mean, people have talked about how important that is for child poverty, reducing child poverty. But it's also a recognition of the labor of the parent. And so we start there, and what we're doing as parents for disabled children involves a lot more of that kind of labor and other kinds of labor, and more fine-tuned labor, right? In terms of how we attend to and care for our child. So I think if we're going to talk about ourselves not being martyrs, and talk about our labor as not being a martyr, well, it shouldn't be a martyrdom, first of all. Motherhood shouldn't be a martyrdom. Very interesting. In my first book, I actually recommend that all labor, all caring labor, regardless of what it is, familial, paid, should be paid. And so we were discussing this in class one time with students, and some of them, of course, were horrified at the idea that their mothers should be paid. And one student said, I would have loved for my mother to be paid, because I always felt so guilty taking all that time from her and labor from her, right? And I would have felt so much better if I knew that she was being compensated for that. Isn't that wonderful? And
very insightful kid.
A very insightful kid. And so, and at that point, the other kids in the class said, well, maybe there's something to this. The point is, we don't want to be martyrs. We don't want to come across as martyrs. We don't want to be martyrs. We take care of our kids because we love them. We care about them just like any mother cares about them. But you also have to understand what it means when someone is fully dependent or mostly dependent, or has a disability that actually impairs their judgment. And and you have to be vigilant in a way that most mothers try to, contain their vigilance about their children's decisions. But you have to, because it's a life and death matter.
Absolutely. So I want to ask you about another concept that I think could be useful in negotiating the really contested terrain of the autism community, and that is epistemic humility.
Yes.
Can you tell us what that is? I guess my perspective on epistemic humility was more kind of a broader humility about, engaging with people of different backgrounds and different lived experience.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I'm not going to understand what someone who's like a mildly affected autistic self-advocate, what their experience is like. And I don't believe they can understand what its life is like for Jonah. And we just have to approach these interactions with that kind of humility. Just never on a broader level.
Never presume that you really know.
Yeah.
Never presume that you really know. And never presume that you really understand.
Right. I think that if people did that, it would kind of calm some of the hostility if there wasn't so much, speaking for the entire autism community. I don't really think that's possible. And if we approach all the different stakeholders, approach one another with that humility and that knowledge that we don't understand the position of the other, it would be a lot more of a productive kind of conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it applies to our kids, it applies to ourselves in our interactions with each other. So, I don't really understand what it's like for you to have a child that can do these things, but can't do those things, So there's some, trying to remember her name, someone who can, has perfect pitch and can identify notes very easily, but can't tell you what color something is, And she says, okay, so you can identify these colors. Can you identify this? No, we can't. And no, I can't. Most people can't. And she says, see, you can do this, but you can't do that. Because you can do this doesn't mean you can do that. Right. So, generalizing from any bit of knowledge is a very dangerous thing. It's a very dangerous thing. And it's very divisive if you think that you know what the other person knows. Yeah. I mean, like my dear friend, she became a friend, the disabled scholar who was at the Hastings Center. She needed a lot more humility in terms of epistemic humility with respect to what I was experiencing, what my daughter was experiencing. And all we can do is learn from each other as much as possible.
You guys became friends? That's how the story ends, after she confronted you in that way and you ended up becoming friends?
Oh, well, that wasn't our only confrontation. Yeah. I mean, no. We continued to be, and there are many debates that we were on the same side of, like debates with Peter Singer, for example. There we were colleagues in arms.
Yeah.
So, and I think she learned a lot from me. I learned a lot from her. I learned, for example, that efforts to help are not always appreciated, and for good reason, because I didn't know how to help her in the right way, and trying to walk her out the door. And it was rather, having her bite at me for doing that was not very pleasant, but it was a lesson. I did learn that you really have to ask someone how they want to be helped or if they want to be helped. And so you can learn a lot from adversaries. If you're willing, if you're willing to learn. And I think she learned a lot from me as well. And I know because she referred people with children with disabilities to me. No, we both wound up having a great deal of respect for one another. We weren't close pals, but we were friends. I would say we were friends. We really respected one another.
That's hopeful, because I really hope that the adversaries in the autism world can also come to a similar point of mutual respect and epistemic humility as we kind of resolve these or debate these kind of larger questions of the types of services and supports that should be available to this population. I know it affects your family, because Center of Discovery is one of those settings that's under attack by some of these advocates. But we are actually out of time, Eva. I could talk to you about these issues. I didn't even get to half my questions. Maybe we'll have to talk again. I just think that care ethics is such an important framework for our community to start thinking with and thinking about. And I really appreciate all the work you've done to articulate it for us.
And caring about each other.
Yeah.
About each other, I think we have to understand their perspective.
Yeah.
As well as having them understand our perspective. So I don't know, it may be hard, it may not happen, but I hope it will happen, because it's in the service of our children, in the service of the people we love. I think about it.
So thank you again.
Okay. Thank you, Amy, for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to Autism Confidential. If you'd like to learn more, share an idea for an episode, or become a sponsor, please visit us at autismconfidential.org. The views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individual speakers. Content presented is for informational purposes only, and we do not provide any medical or legal advice.